Good morning, my lovely bee experts that you are all becoming. To celebrate the very last assembly on bees, certainly for a while before we move on to think about something else, you will notice something about me. I've chosen to wear for you today and for us today one of my favourite necklaces. And if you can see there really closely, this is a bee necklace because I love bees so much. And it's got all the way around. I like to think that this is a queen bee, not a worker bee or a drone bee. I like to think it's a queen bee, the one that lives the longest and has a very important work to do. So do you remember yesterday we learned about the 3 different types of bees who live together as part of a big family? There was let's do them in order. Which was the biggest one? The queen bee, absolutely, and her job was to lay the eggs. That was her job. She stays mainly in the hive. And then there was the male bees, and their job was to fertilize the queen's eggs, and they were called drone bees. They were the next biggest. And last of all, the smallest but the hardest working of them all were the female worker bees. So I thought we'd have a look today a little bit more closely in terms of what happens inside a bee hive or a bee nest when they all live together. So I'm going to talk to you about the different stages and the different things that happen in the beehive. So I'll read this to you. It's fascinating. We just don't get to see this very often. A family of bees is made up of tens of thousands of bees who are all related to each other and live together. They form a superbly well-organised society in which each member has a specific role to play. The life of a bee begins at the moment when the mother, the queen bee, lays an egg in the cell of the honeycomb. A larva then hatches out of the egg. Oh, let me see if I can find the picture there. The queen laying her eggs inside the cells of the comb. So in each cell of the honeycomb, this picture here, there's the queen bee. Can you see her right in the middle? She's laying an egg which then hatches into the bee larvae in each one of the cells. There she is in the middle, and then that's her job done. From that point, the bees or the larvae that hatches from the queen's eggs need to be fed, and that's the next stage in their life cycle. Worker bees feed it on pollen and honey. So that's amazing. So all the bees in this picture here that are feeding the larvae are the worker bees, the female worker bees. And of course, the drones have already done their job. They've fertilized the queen's eggs so she could lay them. And then the worker bees feed all the larvae in the little cells with pollen. Did it say pollen? Pollen and honey, and the honey they've made themselves. That's clever, isn't it? Then they seal the top of each cell with wax so that the larva can grow into an adult bee without being disturbed. Wow, that's amazing. So they seal them all into wax. There's a picture on the next page of a different angle. There they are feeding the little larva. And then when they get bigger, they seal it with wax, with beeswax, so that the larva can change and grow safely from being really small to where it's ready to hatch. And then the little newbies, the newbies have to kind of find their way out and eat their way out probably through that beeswax to emerge into the hive. Let me see if I'm right. When its transformation is complete, so when it's changed from being a larva to a bee, the young bee chews its way through the top of the cell and emerges into the world as another worker bee, drone bee, or queen bee. And they know right from the beginning which one of those bees they are. Worker bees begin their careers as cleaners. So worker bees start off, the female worker bees, as cleaners. Their job is to tidy up the honeycomb cells, and then they are promoted to feeding the larvae. Later on, they are given more specialised tasks, such as receiving the nectar and pollen brought in by the other bees, building and repairing the comb or guarding the entrance to the hive. Finally, they are sent outside to become forager bees, and that's when they go outside to collect the nectar and the pollen. Worker bees are born near the end of summer, They continue this work for the rest of their adult lives, which usually lasts about 5 weeks. Worker bees who are born near the end of summer live longer because they can sometimes survive the winter by staying in the hive. The life of drones or male bees is much easier. They don't work, they don't gather food, but they are left and they are fed by the worker bees. So the female worker bees feed everybody in the hive, from the larva to the queen bee to the male drone bees. In fact, a drone bee's only job is to fertilise the queen's egg and become the father of a new generation of bees. Unfortunately, the drones who manage to do this die immediately. Oh dear, I'm not sure I'd like to be a drone bee. The others live a little longer, but in the autumn, the workers push any remaining drones out of the hive when food becomes scarce and they end up dying of hunger. Ooh. So which is the best bee to be? The queen bee, she just stays around in the hive. A drone bee, doesn't seem like they have much of a life. But the worker bees, maybe that's the best bee to be, the female worker bees who do all of those jobs and they're kept busy doing really important things. So I promised you that I would tell you and teach you how bees made honey. So shall we have a guess before we read this? Which bees do you think make the honey? The drones, the workers, or the queen bee? What do you think? It's the worker bees, isn't it? Of course. It's the worker bees being busy bees. That's what we say when we say, oh, you've been a real busy bee. I think you're being like a worker bee, really. So how do we make honey? How do bees make honey? Well, as we know, number one, the first step in the process is that bees collect nectar from flowers with their tongues and store it in their honey stomachs. Number two, these bees fly back to the hive and pass the nectar to another bee using their mouths, probably to another worker bee. So they collect it in their stomach and then they can regurgitate it and pass it on to another bee once it's in their hives. And then the bee, this is really lovely. It's a bit gory. The bee makes spit bubbles with the nectar until it turns into honey, which is then stored in the wax cells. So that's where the honey comes from that we eat. It's transformed from the nectar that they find in the flowers, passed on to another bee in the hive, who then makes bubbles out of the nectar until it turns into honey, and then it's stored neatly inside the honeycombs, where it's then used to feed the larvae and the other bees. The bees seal the honey in each cell with a wax lid on top to keep it fresh. And the warm hive is the perfect place to make honey. Bees flap their wings to keep air flowing through the hive, keeping the colony cool. Well, there we go. And just in this book, just to finish off, depending on what flowers the bees have fed on, let me have a look, depends on the flavour of the honey that is produced. And I've got here somewhere, where is it, Mrs. Scarterfield? Come on. Oh, here we go. A whole page of different types of honey. Have a look at this, depending on what flowers the bees have been feeding on. And that's not the right page. There we go. It depends on what flavour the honey comes. So let's have a look. What have we got along the top? All sorts of different ones, all with a slightly different flavour. And then moving down. Isn't that remarkable? So depending on where the bees live, depending on the flowers that they collect the nectar from, that affects the flavour of the honey. And some honey is really, really expensive if the bees have been feeding on some particularly rare or nice tasting flowers. So there we go. That's what honey is. It is entirely made naturally by the bees. It is not a man-made process like marmalade or jam. Honey is made by the bees, collected by the beekeepers, put into jars and then sold to us so that we can have it on our breakfast tables and put it into our porridge or put it on a piece of toast. And it is naturally sweet from the nectar that the bees then make into honey. That's how bees make honey. Isn't that amazing? I'll leave that fact with you for today. Have a lovely Thursday, everybody. I'll see you soon.